So welcome to part 3 there we are, of this Hohner Arietta refurbishment. I've in the previous video I've got the reeds out and I've cleaned them, I've checked them, and I've also checked the reed tip height and adjusted a few of those to make sure they've got a nice little appropriate gap. And now I'm going to put some valves on. Now I'm going to choose from 3 different valve sizes I've got here. I've got a whole range of different sizes, but I've chosen 3 which I will need for this set of reeds for different sizes, so to make sure they cover the slot properly. And they're all multi-layered vinyl valves, and I'm going to glue them on. And when I've glued them on, I'll leave them for a little bit and then I'll trim them down accordingly. Now to glue them on, I'm going to use valve glue. Now I've got 2 different kinds here. I've got the Hohner valve glue, which is about 12 quid for a tube, which is really good, but I'm experimenting with a similar glue that I found, which is a kind of a shoe glue, because that was recommended. This is a Polish one, and that's about half the price, but I think it's the same kind of stuff. Not to be funny, but I think it's kind of, it looks very similar. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this. Now I've got a little cunning thing going on here as well, so I've got a little pot to put that glue in. And I've got one of these pads. I got it from Lidl's. It's one of those heat pads that you kind of click the metal thing and the gel warms up. So I'm going to put that down. I'm going to put my little pot on the top, and I'm going to put the glue in there, because that will just keep it nice temperature. Because if you keep it a bit warmer, I'm just thinking it will just stay nice and liquid just for a little bit longer without going hard. So I just put a little bit in the bottom of my cup, and then I'm just going to start. I'll just do one valve to show you, and then I'll just do all the others off camera because you don't really need to see everything. Now I'm going to start with the lowest reed on this set. Now I'm not going to put the valve on the top, or the one that I will see when I put it into the reed block, because I'm going to wax them in and then put that valve on, because just in case I get any wax on the reed plate. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the valve on the underside of all of these reeds, wax them into the reed block, and once they're all waxed in nice and neatly, I'll put the valve on the outer side of the reed plate. So I'm going to put the valve on the inner side. So I'm going to choose my valve that I'm going to use for that one, and I'm going to put probably, I don't see, there's the camera. Hang on a minute. Just about that much glue on the end of the valve. So I just got a little brush. Just put a little bit of glue. I'll measure it in a second, I think, just to see how much I put on. So a little bit of this glue in my little pot. Attach that to the. So I'm butted it up to the rivet, and I'll just leave that just to make sure it's fully dry. And there we go. First one done. So I'll just use another valve, and oh, I was going to measure how far it was. So on that particular valve, I was putting, see how much glue I was putting on there. It's about 7 millimeters, so less than a centimetre. But on these ones I was putting about 7 mil of this glue. There we go. Put that on. Now as the reeds get smaller, the amount of glue you'll put on the valve will just get a bit less. So it's kind of, what is it, 7, 1, 2, probably a fifth of the length of the valve, maybe a sixth. But as you get to the smaller reeds, the amount of glue that you put on will obviously be just a bit less, but keeping the same proportion if you like. So there we go. I'll just do a couple. The glue is doing really nicely, so that's just keeping it a nice consistency. There we go. Okay, so I won't do too much of this because it's not the most exciting thing, as I said before, but I'll just put these on one side only, and I'll show you what I've done when I've got them all glued on. Okay, so I've done the gluing, and so all the valves are nicely on. So the next step is to get a nice pair of very sharp scissors and trim the valves so they are just level with the end of the reed slot. So I'm just going to lift up the valve with the scissors, just carefully trim the valve till it's level. So I'm going to go along all of the reeds and trim the valves first of all so they're level with the end of the reed slot, and I'll do that and then I'll show you what I do next. Okay, so they've all been trimmed to the end of the reed slot, but the other thing is that because I've trimmed them all, I'm going to trim the second layer. So there's a kind of black layer on the top. Because I've slightly trimmed the valve, I'm going to very slightly trim the black layer just to keep the kind of balance of the valve. So just really the same that I trimmed off the valve itself. So I'm just going to go along and just trim the second layer very slightly so it kind of matches how much I took off the valve at the tip end. There we are. So I'm just going to go along and do that. Come back in a sec. Okay, so those have now been all valved and trimmed. Now if I just I'll stop the camera and I'll just show you a different view. Here we go. So that's all of the valves in place and trimmed. The last three, because they're tiny little reeds, didn't need to have any valves on them, so they didn't have any on to start with, so they've just been left. And so that's all ready to go. So now the next step is to get these reeds waxed into the reed block, and then once they're in, I'll put the valves on the other side. Okay, so that's the end of this little video. I hope it was useful.